Hello and welcome to this special panel discussion on the film Section 16. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's conversation. So just a few words about me. I worked as a journalist for most of my professional career in South Africa, working in television, but also worked in Kenya for about 7 years in Nairobi. I've recently transitioned now to communications, where I work on audio and podcasting in Washington, D.C. It is an honor for me to host this conversation and guide this talk, this discussion about what is really a remarkable film. We are very lucky, of course, to have the director of the film with us. A warm welcome to Emilie Gambade, Emilie, who was born in Paris and studied in the United States, now also calls South Africa home. She is a respected life and culture journalist, editor, film director, and producer who is passionate about people and their stories. Emilie is also currently the editor of Maverick Life, part of Daily Maverick. And previously, she was the editor-in-chief for Elle South Africa and the former managing editor of Marie Claire. A warm welcome to you, Emilie, and also to Pauli van Wyk, who you would have seen in the film. Of course, she is one of South Africa's most respected investigative journalists. And as you've seen in the documentary, she has fearlessly investigated corruption in both the private and public sectors. Her investigations into the Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF, revealed their involvement in the VBS Mutual Bank scandal. She was also instrumental in the exposure of corruption at the South African Revenue Service. Pauli has won a host of awards for her courageous work writing about justice, state-owned companies, and politics. Once more, a very warm welcome to both of you. Now, by way of introduction, very much so. I wanted just to share part of my response to this film. Emilie, thank you for making this film. It is, to me, both necessary and indeed very, very timely. It is a reminder of the fact that almost throughout history, women who speak out have been punished. I once read about a device called a scold's bridle, something similar to a bridle that you would put in a horse's mouth. It was used almost exclusively on women in 16th century England to punish women who were considered gossips. Now, of course, the word gossip is relative, right? In its time, whether it was then or now, gossiping at that time, I think could be conceived as simply spreading news, right? Maybe very important news. But it was used to punish women whose speech was considered troublesome or offensive. This bridle was placed in a woman's mouth. It was like a metal mask, and it would gag the tongue so tightly that if you tried to talk, you would scratch or cut your tongue. And then the wearer of this bridle, was paraded through town on a leash. And the punishment just had the dual effect of both silencing the wearer, the woman, but also humiliating her. And so we've come very far along, but some aspects of this really haven't changed very much. And I think that's what the film shows. Section 16 draws attention to the fact that women who speak out are indeed muzzled, that social media is now weaponized against women with the aim of both silencing and humiliating women journalists. And in addition, it has the effect of distracting the public from the news, the content of what these women were speaking about. So, Emilie, allow me to start with you then. Can you talk us through what inspired you to make this documentary that specifically focuses on women journalists in South Africa who are silenced for speaking out and exposing wrongdoing by those in power?
Thank you so much, Lindy, for your words and for introducing the film in that way. I think first, I just want to say that I'm one of the co-directors. I did the film in collaboration with Malibongwe Tilo, who is also the cinematographer on the film and who is a brilliant journalist himself. So when it started with Pauli, who is here because we work together at Daily Maverick, and when the VBS stories started to come out, I was one of the journalists just witnessing the attacks, and working in life and culture, I'm not subject to this kind of violence, and when it happened, I think we were all wondering what is happening, and Pauli being one of our colleagues, and the way it was targeted at her, it felt so disempowering, so scary and frightening for everyone in the newsroom, and no one at the time knew where it was coming from. Why? I mean, we knew obviously it was the EFF reacting to the stories, but we didn't understand the machine behind it. That was, that one tweet, what it would spark, and in parallel. The International Center for Journalists and the team of Julie Possetti, who was heading online research, groundbreaking, trailblazing research on online violence against journalists, had released a very powerful report called The Chilling, that was done in partnership with UNESCO, and that was exploring what was happening. So it was really the beginning of both in-depth research on the topic, and at the same thing, different women journalists experiencing that. So there was Maria Ressa in the Philippines, and then their studies were looking at Maria, and then at Pauli, Feriol, Karin, Marianne Tam in South Africa, and looking at the intersection of racial, gender, everything that was coming together in these attacks. And this report came out and really was the first of its kind, highlighting what was happening. And we thought doing a film about, because Feriol Hafaji, Pauli van Wyk, Karin Dolly are all part of Daily Maverick. And we thought, let's do a film about it. Let's talk about it. We need to be able to show what's happening. And because we could film over a few years, we could go through also understanding what was happening a little bit better, and showing that in the film, and making the comparison as well from what was, what Feriol Hafaji and Marianne Tam, who were reporters also during apartheid, and what was happening today, and again the intersection of what was happening, and the way the attacks were targeting women, because research has shown that it is easier to silence women because we tend to retract more easily, because it is harder to have a voice, and it is it is easier to silence women.
That's very true. Even for me, on a personal level, I don't use Twitter very much. I find it a very combative space. And in sort of early interactions that made me uncomfortable, I was just reacting to something mean or harsh that a particular individual might have said to me, or how they responded to something I tweeted. And it made me apprehensive about using that platform, to the extent now that I read from it, but I don't really write on it or engage with it in that way. Pauli, I want to come to you on that, because what I'm referring to is responding to one individual's attack on me, as it were. But in your instance, this attack wasn't about one person. It was a coordinated campaign against you, carried out by extremely powerful people that have access to state resources, all kinds of resources that could actually put you in danger. And on top of that, they have the capacity to galvanize large numbers of people against you. Can you just talk us through what that experience is like and how you found a way to respond to it?
Thank you, Lindy. It's an interesting topic because in hindsight, everything is so clear. But when you are in the thick of it and things are happening around you, suddenly you're thinking, you don't know what's going on. It's very much like Emily said, we were perplexed and we were wondering, how is this possible, and how is it okay, and how is it that other people are allowing it? So, because at the time I wasn't a junior journalist, I have written about really big stories, and I have highlighted corruption across South Africa in different sectors, and we'll erase as a part of the narrative. So in that way, I've highlighted corruption and wrongdoing across races as well. So it wasn't, so me doing my work as a journalist was not a new thing. The reaction was a new thing. And it was the first time that I specifically wrote negative about the EFF leaders. Previously, in around 2016, 2017, I wrote about them, but in a positive way, because at the time they were fighting for justice, standing up for the public protector in South Africa, and standing up against a president that was shown and proven to be really corrupt and a very bad leader for South Africa. And in that time, the EFF was sort of a pillar of strength in coalitions and taking very important court cases right up to the Constitutional Court. And I personally was there and I reported on those court cases. So it wasn't the first time writing about the EFF, but it was the first time highlighting their corruption. And we were wondering, how can this be? Is it how is it that people are allowing it, and that this reaction is so easy to extract from people as well? Because what happened was Julius Malema tweeted things like, "You are Satan, you're a witch," wapapa, which is vernacular, you can probably translate it better, but meaning you are forward or you are out of your place, you are talking out of your place. And so we were not sure how to handle this, because on the one hand, you're a journalist who also need to be removed from the story and removed from things happening. But in the second instance, you're also being attacked as being a white girl, never a woman, right? Never powerful, never someone taking up space, always a girl. So you're a white girl attacking Black men, not boys, men, who's the pillar of strength in the community, good guys who's doing God's work, and who's standing up against what's wrong in South Africa. And now you are the one being racist to start off with, and being the liar. Your reports are misleading, and you're a bad journalist. And actually, you're not a journalist; you're a politician. So he and Floyd Shivambu started with things like that, and that started like a snowball effect of dog whistling, where their followers would just compete at who could say worse things at me, to the point where people would say I should be hanged and raped and mutilated, and those were the kind things that one would say. So to handle that was tough at the time because we didn't understand it. Years on, it's a different story. Now we understand that it's about power. It's about cutting you off at the knees. It's not about race, actually. Race is the symptom because it's the easy target, right? It's just because who's this person writing about me? She's a woman, she's white, and she has a particular background in the history of South Africa. So we have these and these and these weapons, of which race is one. So the story is not about race, but race is weaponized in a highly volatile situation. So you start to realize that certain things, even that they're not true, but they're weaponized against you, and the end goal is actually what's important here. It is always to silence you. It is always to dehumanize you, calling you a witch. And that was interesting, looking at Julia Possetti's international investigation, where she came to the conclusion, and other investigators too had the similar conclusions, where when women are dehumanized, it's so much easier to say that they should be raped and hanged, and that they are unbelievable, that they shouldn't be believed, and that they should not be taken seriously. That's actually the point. So to dehumanize you so that you're not taken seriously, and that your message is shelved and it's made off as not true, because you are not really human and you are not really believable. And when you start to understand that broader context, and that it fits within the political movement in terms of the United States, Indonesia, and everything in between, Hungary, Spain, France, Italy, we see journalists being attacked and the same methods used, and the weaknesses, where one could say a weakness in terms of not having a better word now, but the weakness here is being a white person in a problematic history in South Africa, where they have their other sort of weak points where they could be attacked, and those then being used, right? So that is that's some of the features, and the moment you understand why and how and the goal, then you realize, okay, but I can handle this. I am strong and my message ring true. I've never been taken to court, even through all their threats, because they do not dare. And South Africans should know. That is actually the beginning and the end of all of it. South Africans should know what they do with that. It's not my problem. It's not my work. South Africans should know, because that is how they will make life decisions. They base their life decisions on the available information in South Africa. So that sort of is the layering, I think, in terms of Section 16 and what we try to show over years, and which I think is also the strength of Section 16, because it took the story and followed us over years. It could also show our development and understanding and our growth, which I think was a marvelous strength of this documentary.
Indeed. I mean, as a film, the fact that the key characters such as yourself, Pauli, were followed over a period of time gives it a certain sense of depth, right? That not many other films might have. And I want to come to you, Emilie, on that point about some of the choices you made as a filmmaker, particularly on the question of dignity and dehumanization. We've heard Pauli speak now, but just how dehumanizing these attacks are, and how that is a particular element of how they structure these campaigns and structure and write and post on these types of attacks. So from your perspective, Emilie, how did you attempt to restore the humanity of the women that you interviewed? How did you attempt to rehumanize them as a filmmaker?
It's a very good question, because it was constantly at the back of our mind between Malibongwe and I, and the main thing was to work. I mean, we were lucky again that we work with Pauli, Karine, Feriol, and Marianne, and we could have that constant conversation with each of them and showing them the film as it progressed and as we did the edits, so making them part of the story as well, because eventually it's not our story, it is theirs, and there's a responsibility in what we share. So even there were quite personal moments. I mean, when Feriol speaks about how it was difficult for her family, because when she understood those images that were photoshopped and talking about dehumanization and properly horrible, and she made a peace with it, because she was like, that's not me. Like, at one point, even she talks about that pink dress, that, you know, there's one thing, like Pauli says, making peace with that yourself. But what about your uncle, your aunt, the people around you, and who might not be equipped to understand what's happening? Because there's one thing about journalists knowing and having the tools to understand what's happening, and there's another thing with the people out there. So it was constantly talking with Feriol and making sure that it was okay for us to share that conversation in that context, with those tweets appearing next to her. And the same with Marianne, when she speaks about her personal journey and what her family, it was really interesting, because actually we learned a lot from, I think Malibongwe is not here with me, but I know we learned so much from filming, and we haven't stopped. And actually, we're working now on another project with it is leading to something else, talking about, because in the process we realized, how do we fight that dehumanization? How do we bring the human behind the journalist again? Because that's also a massive problem around the world. It's not specific to South Africa. It is really around the world, I think, because there's such a confusion between what is media, what is social media, what is journalism, what is the role of journalists, what is the difference between Fox News and another platform, and where is the journalist in this? And I think so we're working around another set of series around that really bring the humans behind. That's the only thing we can do, telling those stories and sharing the stories to show that, hey, behind that tweet that you're sending, there's a human being. I mean, you know, sorry, in front, at the receiving end, there's a human being who might actually be really impacted by what you say. And what Pauli says in the film as well, when she says, do no harm, it's if only we could think about that before we say do no harm.
You know, of course, and Pauli was just speaking a moment ago about how these targeted attacks on social media were detracting from the content of her work, but also fueling hostility around the question of race in particular, which we know is a hot topic in South Africa. So, Emilie, as a filmmaker, how did you navigate that element of the question of race in this film?
Same, I think it was making sure that we had different voices in the film as well. And that was, you know, led by our experience. I mean, the Daily Maverick newsroom, don't quote me on this because I don't know the exact number, but it is the majority is women, women journalists and women teams. And then it was really looking at making sure that we have different voices, whether even it's an age, gender, background. The experience of Feriol is very different from the experience of Karin Dolly, who is and even in their field of expertise. And yet they're all facing the same attacks. And that's the same, I think that's the strength also of the report from Julie Possetti, is you see that regardless of where those women come from, the attacks, the minute the attacks are unleashed, there's the same playbook. It is the same way, it's the same machine that is starting. And then it's different tools used for different women, but the result is the same, the silencing of the journalists.
And the next step of that, Pauli, coming back to you, is that it actually does expose you to the potential of physical attacks, to, you know, real danger to your physical and personal safety. Do you find that you have to consider that now going forward in terms of navigating this line between exposing corruption and crime, but also ensuring your own safety?
Yeah, definitely. So you think you spend a lot of time thinking about personal safety, but also, and even most importantly, about sources safety, because these are not nice people that you write about. And even when you know, going forward in terms of different topics and people exposed before the EFF, people generally do not like you showcasing and shining a spotlight on their crimes, right? So it's where they will attack you and ensure that you may want to stop. The problem lies always with your sources, because if they cut the sources off at the knees, the journalist has no voice. And that is a big problem for me. So we spend a lot of time ensuring that our laptops and our PCs are safe, that we don't have documents in our homes. We ensure that the people that we speak to are that there are sort of Chinese walls between us, and we try to take really good care of them. I'm very fortunate to have an editor who is a pillar of strength. I think if it wasn't for Branko Brekic, I wouldn't have been here for the past, definitely not now, and definitely not in the past 4 to 5 years. He was the person, and I think every newsroom with investigative journalists need a Branko Brekic, because he was always the person who ensured that I am okay, and who would phone me to make sure that my physical safety is taken care of. And he would send someone to me to do an assessment on my safety at home. Or he would phone me and say, I think you better leave town for now. I'll pay for you. Daily Maverick will pay. Go away for 2 weeks. Take the dogs and be safe somewhere where I choose, and I know that you are safe. And that helps, you know, so because often it's not only the physical safety. Physical safety is sort of the last thing that you worry about, but there are many steps in between. And for any other editor listening to this and trying to assist their own journalists, is that their psychological safety is so much more important. And where physical safety is just one of the things that they worry about. But if it's the psychological safety that is that's being cut at the knees, your journalist is useless. I think it was in Giulia Posetti, actually, her report, where one of the journalists just could never return to work after similar attacks. She just could never be a strong female journalist writing about corruption and shining a spotlight on wrongdoing. And they didn't kill her, but they killed her psychologically. And that was the important thing. So you need good colleagues, you need a really good editor, and then you need a really good support system. And I would say if you can, and if you feel ready, it's always a good idea to go see a psychologist in the run-up to you knowing you're going to drop a big story, and in the aftermath as well. I didn't do it. If I ever do publish a new story that I know will make waves, I'll ensure that I do that. You need to protect yourself.
Indeed. And it's important that, what you were saying about the protection that comes from the newsroom and your editor. And it actually brings me to the title of the film, because perhaps the greatest protection of all is South Africa's constitution, is the rule of law. To this day, it's one of the most beautiful constitutions ever drafted, and it's considered inspiring and progressive for its time. Sometimes I think of it as almost like a torch, that whenever times are dark, we need to hold onto it and let it lead us, guide us to some place better. But I must ask you both, let me start with you, Emilie. Do you think ultimately that the Constitution, that Section 16, is a blunt instrument?
I hope not. I hope not. And that's why I think we called the film Section 16, because it is, I think what you're saying about the torch is exactly that. And there is a message of hope in the film, and that things can change. And that's why we have a constitution, because surely somewhere there is a line that, we can hang on to and be like, that line that said, do no harm. And it is clear in the constitution. It's written, and yeah, it will win. It should win. That's yeah. I think it was both when we were looking for a title. It came very quickly, because it was so evident. Like you said, it is the South African Constitution is such an example around the world, and it was like, we need to hold on to that. If anything, in the noise that there is online, in the cacophony, in the chaos, we can hold on to that. Let's read it together. Let's go back to this when we're all confused and lost. So no, I really am hopeful. I'm really hopeful.
And how about you, Pauli? Are you similarly hopeful? Do you think that the Constitution it has the capacity really to contribute to a safer and better environment for women journalists?
My favorite part of Section 16 is the part that people do not remember. Section 16 is all about media freedom, and it is the groundwork for setting up a media that is free and impartial, especially based again on South Africa's problematic history, where in the apartheid years there was no free press and no freedom of information. But my favorite part of Section 16 is Section 16B, which says people have the right to receive information. And that for me is much more important than anything else in that section, where it's not actually about the journalist. It's not, people call it media freedom law and media freedom rights and the media freedom section 16. It's not that. It's completely mistermed. It's people's freedom. It is your freedom to receive information. It is your freedom to know what is going on in your world. It is your freedom to be able to make capable decisions for your own life based on true information. There is no bigger freedom than that. And therefore, I think it's not the constitution that's a blunt instrument is what we make of it and how we understand it. And if we interact with our constitution, we have to know what it says for it to be a weapon and for it to be a shield, because it is brilliant and it is beautiful, but we should know it.
So what do you think there needs to happen to bridge that gap between what it says and what it has the potential to do, Pauli? I mean, you talk about it as a shield. What do we need to do to bridge that gap, to really make it the shield that it should be?
The French, Emilie can tell us much more about that, has a very interesting history where they teach media studies in school already, which I think is an important lack in South Africa, where we do not have that. So people come out in the world as adults and they don't really understand what media freedom is, and that it's actually, again, it's not media freedom, that it's this mistermed term, but that we're actually in the fact that we as journalists are free to receive and impart information without anyone else's involvement is your freedom to live and receive information and make free life choices. So I think in the first instance, we need to be better educated in terms of our education. We need to use it, know its strengths, know its weaknesses. And I think the media should perhaps write more about these things. We should write more about that this is not our fight, that we are fighting for you, but we cannot do this alone. And this is a worldwide fight. It's not a South African journalism fight. This is everyone who believes in democracy, who believes in the right to a person's individuality and your place in the world and receiving information and making your own free choices, that this is about you and your rights, and therefore media freedom is important, even though I think we should try and reterm that entire theme. It's people's freedom.
Indeed. I mean, it's often sometimes referred to as freedom of expression, and certainly here where I live in the United States, that has really come under a number of tests and attacks, because the very same journalists that rely on these laws of freedom of expression are the very same ones that rather nasty people who are, spewing lies and telling false stories, or, they also lean on this to say, I've also got freedom of expression. And I wonder where you sit on that debate, Emilie. At what point does it become, at what point can, how do we sort of navigate who gets to use it when? That, do we all, what is regarded as freedom of expression and what can't be regarded as freedom of expression?
Look, I think if I knew the answer, I think I would be literally clamoring it everywhere. I don't know, and I was actually listening to a debate on that today, and there were fights, and I'm watching and I'm trying to educate myself as well on the issue. What was interesting recently, again, with my co-director, we went to interview Maria Ressa, and after the Nobel Peace Prize, both Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov wrote the 10-point plan, which I strongly advise everyone to read. It's a fascinating, it's very short, because interviewing Maria was also, because it's the next step almost to what the film shows, which is we tried to focus, or we decided to focus only on Twitter, if you, and really the attacks that were happening on Twitter, and a little bit on WhatsApp as well, which was more Karin Dolly's experience, and really looking at those attacks and how they were growing, because it is a short, so we didn't have the time to explore everything. But when we interviewed Maria Ressa, she was talking about obviously Meta and all online, and the AI and the rise of AI and the rise of fakes also now, on the digital world, and the incapacity of knowing what is true to what is not, what is made up, and the 10 points are really looking at what democracies needs to do in order to fight disinformation, fight the abuse against freedom of the press. And it's it really is a great point that is looking at what democratic governments can do. And I think from what I could gather, it is now something that is, like you mentioned, it is a problem in the US, it is a problem in all democracies around the world. It is a problem that needs to be tackled globally. It needs to be all our governments really decided. It wasn't done before. I mean, that's what Feriol also mentioned in the film. I mean, it should have been done early when social media companies started. We should have, people raised the alarm and we didn't do anything. That's when it should have happened. It's too late now, but it's not too late to act. And I mean, as Feriol says at the end, she said, if those companies have the power to do what they're doing, if we come together, surely we have the power to do something against it. I think, Pauli, you say it as well. Surely there are solutions. So I don't think it's just about deciding what is who has a voice and who hasn't. Is more the role of social media companies who are private companies, and how their power, which is so big now, is affecting democracies around the world. And what do we do now to prevent that? Or mitigate.
And as you mentioned, like, you were just talking about AI, and this is probably the best time now to start thinking about how do we make sure that AI is going to carry the right kind of sort of ideas and policy framework right within its fabric and within its DNA. I mean, Pauli, coming to you, do you have some concerns about how AI might further threaten the lives of women journalists?
Definitely threatening the truth. And then in terms of that, the same old story will happen, threatening female lives and female journalists. So the creation of false and fake videos or something that didn't happen, which makes it so much more difficult. And this actually speaks to your previous question to Emilie as well. I think it's about people should ensure that they cannot, let me rephrase this, you guys will cut it as you please, but I think you cannot infringe on someone else's rights because you have the right of freedom of expression. That will never be okay. Your right to express an opinion cannot be an infringement on someone else's rights. And I think that is some of the places where we need to start drawing the line here, and the example of a gun is always easy to use. So my ability and my right to handle a gun cannot infringe on your ability to live and have a good life. When we look at the Hamas and Palestine and Israeli war at the moment, there's another example here. My right to impart information cannot ensure that I impart fake information to manipulate and to ensure that other people make the wrong choices. Then obviously that's not freedom of expression, it's pure lies, right? But when it's something like the COVID vaccines, then we are in much more treacherous territory, I think, where at the first instance, we didn't know how this virus worked. We didn't know what happened. We didn't know where it came from. We didn't know whether the vaccines worked, and we had to trust. And there's more studies needed and to ensure that we all have more information about what we put in our bodies. And I am one of the people who did receive the vaccine, but you have to have the information to make proper choices, whether you choose that or not. So some of those questions and themes will always be much more difficult, and some will always be much more clear-cut. But I think the start and end of it is you cannot impart harm. You cannot ensure that someone is harmed because you have the right of expression.
That's a very, very good point. It does very strongly speak to that sense, to that question of when harm actually happens. And it is a time in which we have to consider what the unregulated use or, use of AI spaces needs to take into consideration as this space continues to grow. We're almost sort of leading towards the last parts of our conversation, I think, in terms of time. So I want to just return to some of the key themes of the film, especially around that question of, especially about looking at the gendered aspect of it. I wondered, Pauli, first, if I can start with you, if you could reflect on how it is that your male counterparts in the newsroom responded to the film and how they may have looked at this as something that was new to them in terms of their experience, also perhaps as investigative journalists, but how there is a particular gendered approach to the experience of women journalists.
That's such an interesting question, because I was thinking just now whether any of my male friends actually ever, who saw the film, said something about it to me in private. And I cannot, except for Branko Brikic, who's my editor but also my friend, I can't think of anyone else actually who said anything about it, in terms of in a supportive way. And I do think this is, it's an interesting theme, Lindy, because I don't think men understand really, even people on our side, right? People who have other journalists who would, in theory, think that attacks on any journalist is wrong. I don't think they understand the violence against you when people say that you should be raped and hanged, and the violence of other men against, or a bunch of men, a host of men in my case, and everyone in Section 16, against one single female. I don't think they understand that on a basic level, which is probably why it's so effective as well, because other people, especially men, do not rein in other men. And I think that's perhaps a conversation that all of us should have with our friends, and mothers should have with their sons, because that's actually where it starts.
Indeed. Emilie, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how has the film been received by men in general?
So, look, I think I don't have the data to really say, there were so many women, so many men who watched the film, and interestingly, the festivals where the film has been was mainly women and director of festivals who have been speaking to. That said, I think that's also why we did the film, because you need to talk about those issues. And I do think that, I was also listening to another podcast around the world hysteria, that women in the past, like the word hysteria was often linked to women, whether it was, when women had their periods or anything, when we said, oh, she's just hysterical or something, and that it became a very pejorative word that is linked to women. And I was having a discussion with one of my male friends and explaining, like, it's a trigger. Like, I hate when someone uses the word hysterical, because when I'm just angry or anything about something, or passionate about something. And anyway, and we were having this whole debate, and he wasn't getting the point, and I was like, and I guess it's the same with a lot of things that are, again, at the intersection of, or that are around race, gender, sexual orientation. It's all this vocabulary that has been attached to certain things, and that you have accepted or made it yours because it's been going on for so long. So I think what Pauli is saying about it doesn't even occur to women to be like, yeah, we're not talking about it, actually. Yeah, it's not. It's because it became the norm, sort of, that. And I think that's why also when the research says it's easier to silence women, because at one point women will be like doubting ourselves and feel guilty, even like, yeah, maybe I am a bad person. Maybe I am that person that they are mentioning. And so the only way basically to change that is to talk about it, and to talk more about it, and to talk openly about it, and yeah, and do exactly, yeah, have this question and be like, yeah, you're right, actually I don't know what men have been thinking about the documentary. Although I have to say that we screened the film once in Cape Town, and there were great reaction from the audience, and it was a mixed and diverse audience. And I think everyone felt like, you know, we had men coming and say, I want to talk to my daughter about it, or I've got, that everyone could relate. What was amazing at that moment is everyone found in the film something that they resonated with, just because it touched also on social media. And I think all of us are somehow on social, like what you said, you also try to not tweet because you are afraid. So even if you're not a journalist, even if it just speaks to you about something.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was something for me that I've been reflecting on since watching the film. So, I mean, thank you for that, because, you know, I realized that what I had done was to process all of this as if I had done something wrong. Something I wrote must have been so terrible that it elicited this reaction from a couple of people. And it takes me back to the courage that the women in your documentary exhibit. So, Pauli, perhaps just a final word from you about what it takes for you to continue going on, and your resolve to continue doing the work that you do in exposing corruption in South Africa.
So we've mentioned a number of those things already. A really good editor who's in your corner always and believes in you. Friends who have your back. And I think men, and it's starting to happen now, where and I think it's because people started believing in what I say, you know, believing in the truth of what they say. So I do recognize that some of them are much more keen to shield me on social media, where they would say, leave her alone, this is the truth, and if it's not the truth, take her to court and challenge it, you know, which is how you have a proper conversation. Or people would very quickly be called out and say, but you're not discussing the facts here, you are discussing the person. And even if she's white and she might be racist and she might be a really bad person, but is she wrong? Right? So that is actually, are the facts wrong? And that in the end is what the journalism is about, is we have to learn to consider the facts, even though those facts stand in a context, and we need to discuss those facts. And we need to understand that corrupt and bad people will find a way to divert a conversation, because it's not in their interest for you to shine a spotlight on what they're doing. And they are getting all the more crafty in the way they divert that conversation. And the more we are educated in media usage, the more we are educated in our right to receive information that's on point, that is the truth, and that you can believe in, even if you do not like the messenger, but the information is truthful, then we need to have a proper conversation about that. And then lastly, I think that is exactly the reason why we need media institutions and media companies who we can trust. Because if that media company, if Daily Maverick cannot be trusted, how will their journalists be taken seriously? And at the moment, I think we have a really high trust value in South Africa. People take us very seriously. They believe in us. And they discuss we punch far above our weight at Daily Maverick, where people discuss what we write to them, and we have a high value in South Africa. So brand building and always standing on the side of truth is important. And when you make errors, or you have something wrong, which we all do in our careers, you will never not have a career without some errors, because we're human. Then you also have to come out and say that and say sorry, and then correct it. So those for me are the most important themes.
Well, thank you so much for that, Pauli. And as you say, you know, Daily Maverick has become central to the national discourse because of the work that journalists such as yourself do. So we wish you all the best as you continue fighting the good fight, even at a cost to your personal safety, your emotional safety. And we thank you for all the work that you do. Allow me also to thank you, Emilie, for this incredible, incredible film. I think it is already an important step in naming what it is that happens to women journalists. As much as we had a scold's bridle hundreds of years ago, we have a muzzle too, and it is in this form of social media. So thank you for pointing at it, showing it to us, and allowing these conversations to start happening, because this is how change begins. So thank you very much to the both of you for your time. And also thank you, of course, to the organizers of the South African Film Festival for the work they do in giving a platform for important stories like this from South Africa and important conversations such as this. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and that you've gained a lot of perspective, not only from this discussion, but indeed this remarkable film, Section 16. Thank you. Goodbye.